I suppose, helps when one moves against the zeitgeist in recognition of the surviving virtues of the free marketplace. Mr. Galbraith, as you know, is a great tease. I've known him for many years. I cherish his friendship. The first time we met, not exactly the first time we met, but the first time we engaged in any corporate enterprise, was on the ski slopes in Gstaad. He asked me to ski with him one day about 5 or 6 years ago, and I did so. And after seeing him come down a rather gentle slope, with considerable difficulty, I wondered what would be the appropriate way to comment on the way he had negotiated that slope, given his venerability, his seniority in all matters, intellectual and moral. So I said, "Ken, how long have you been skiing?" Hoping that he would say, "I just began yesterday." And he said, 30 years. I said, "Oh, that's as long as you've been studying economics, isn't it?" I have been a close student of his mind and his work ever since, and I certainly hope that the rest of you will do so. Certainly that would be a justification of the marketplace. But in any event, I have found in him certain altogether endearing habits of mind. He is very self-assured. He is quite certain that that which he understands to be for the benefit of mankind is for the benefit of mankind. His views are always available to the least supplicant. In America, we have AP, UP, Reuters, and Galbraith. And he's always there to tell us exactly what to do under any circumstance, however pinched. He also seems to proceed on the assumption, have you noticed, that executive power is everything. Mr. Nixon has been elected President of the United States. I and the editors of National Review supported Mr. Nixon. Ergo, shouldn't it follow that Mr. Nixon should have succeeded in dismantling those socialist accretions of which we disapprove? It did not occur to Mr. Galbraith to mention in the course of asking you to meditate on this anomaly that the Senate of the United States is dominated by the Democratic Party and that the House of Representatives is dominated by the Democratic Party. It did not occur to him, presumably, to remind you that it is the House of Representatives and the Senate of the United States that passes laws, not the President of the United States. And this is not necessarily because Mr. Galbraith is disingenuous and does not want to pass on to you the elementary facts of American constitutional government. It is because of his sort of, if I may say so, autocratic turn of mind. He's never quite understood things like parliaments or faculties, or if I may say so, even voters. I'm a great admirer of his diaries that he wrote while he was ambassador to India, and I congratulate him with the candor with which he presented them to the reading public. The diaries are full of engrossing entries, and if I may say so, I think many of them are far more illuminating on the question of the marketplace than anything that he has written in the more arid prose intended for economic specialists. For instance, there was that entry sometime in 1962 when he came back from India, and he said, "I have been in Washington 1 week, and I ate in the White House 3 times." There is nothing, he went on, quite to match the feeling of being in. And of course there is nothing quite like matching the experience of being in. If I were plenipotentiary, I'm sure I would be willing to do without the free marketplace. What would be the need of the free marketplace if I could make all decisions, Mr. President? Surely it would not occur to Mr. Galbraith, that there would be necessary the survival of the mechanism of an organization that might come to conclusions contrary to his own. As I say, Mr. Galbraith does this rather innocently, and I don't think it would be right at all for anybody to encourage the suspicion that he harbors within him any totalitarian instincts. I'm sure he believes that dissent has its place, properly situated and properly modulated. But there is one thing about the free marketplace that he has never been able to understand, and that is that it is a mechanism by which people can come to conclusions different from his own. Not necessarily conclusions that you favor or to conclusions that I favor. Professor George Stigler, a man, if I may say so, of very considerable eminence in the economic world, and I do hope and pray that those of you who study economics have heard of him, says that he greatly deplores the findings of the marketplace. He greatly deplores, for instance, the fact that one needs to subsidize symphony orchestras rather than that they should simply continue successfully as a result of public patronage. He greatly deplores the fact that most Americans believe that after you get your BA degree, you don't have to read another work of nonfiction, with the exception of Mr. Galbraith's works. And he goes on to say he greatly deplores that more people have in fact read The Affluent Society than have read The Wealth of Nations. But he is not about to reorder the marketplace system in order to turn it away from readers of Mr. Galbraith's works to readers of Adam Smith's works, nor even in the sublimer cause of requiring people to listen to symphony orchestras. It is a complicated question in my judgment, ladies and gentlemen, because it does get mixed up, I think, with basic problems of epistemology. As I understand it, Mr. Galbraith's thesis is very simply this, namely that the majority of the decisions that are made in America today in the economic world are made by what he calls the technostructure. People who, in fact, are so totally in control of the economic situation that they can, in fact, predict that you will buy their product. And under the circumstances, it is nothing more than mystification to suggest that anything of the free marketplace remains. In his earlier book, he seemed to be saying something rather different. He seemed to be saying that there was this strong oligopolistic industrial management group, which, however, had to face up to certain countervailing pressures that came in from government, that came in from labor unions, but now that has changed. Now, somehow, the latter two have been subsumed by it, and the technostructure is completely in command. What are the characteristics of that technostructure? Survival, prosperity, security. He published this book in 1967, persuading everybody that finally expertise within principal American industries, taking into account the military-industrial complex, taking into account the wiles of advertising, made it absolutely predictable that all of us would forever oblige these firms in essential economic decisions. At the time he wrote, Raytheon was selling for $58. Now it's selling for $22. Saunders, a think tank, especially at the service of the government of the United States, was selling for $77, is now selling for $13. General Dynamics, that giant, was selling for $67, now $21. Collins Radio, $400 million a year. Certainly, in the taxonomy of Mr. Galbraith, a splendid example of the imperturbability of the technostructure, undamageable by the marketplace, selling then for $115. Now you can get it for $15. Boeing, $113 it was selling the day that Mr. Galbraith's book hit the streets. It's selling for $13 today. Now, it seems to me that Mr. Galbraith, who has profound instincts of self-preservation, tends to maneuver out of the way of his own theses when they become especially damaging. And thus it was that when Professor Gordon of Indiana University